Forget everything your high school history books told you about the Oval Office. It isn't a sacred sanctuary for brilliant minds. It's a chaotic asylum hiding the most embarrassing blunders textbooks desperately try to censor. Presidents lose fistfights to swamp rabbits, gamble away government property, and trigger nuclear panics over bad stand-up comedy. I invite you to peek behind the velvet curtain at the clumsy, downright stupid truth behind ultimate power. We're talking about human disasters. 1. Jimmy Carter casually tossed the top secret nuclear launch codes into his suit pocket and sent the whole thing to the dry cleaners. The fate of global civilization literally rested in the hands of a minimum wage laundry worker checking for loose change and chewing gum. A guy earning pennies an hour suddenly held the power to obliterate Moscow before lunch. Carter treated the literal keys to Armageddon like a forgotten gym pass. He misplaced the apocalypse in a pile of dirty laundry, banking on the gentle cycle to save humanity. You leave your corporate ID badge at home, you get locked out of the IT closet. You leave the nuclear football in your blazer, you trigger a global meltdown. Think about that for a second. We survived by luck, an apocalyptic laundry day. A head of state traveled across the world only to be judged solely on his physical aesthetics, bringing us to 2. Millard Fillmore offered zero political substance during his presidency. Queen Victoria met him and managed to scrape together exactly 1 compliment. She called him handsome. The man secured the highest office in the nation, met global royalty, and stood there offering nothing but a decent jawline. He smiled through complex diplomatic meetings with nothing rattling upstairs, offering polite nods instead of treaties. He functioned as a hollow internet influencer, bringing a pretty face to a job demanding actual brainpower. You expect a leader, but you get a mannequin wearing a fancy suit. Pathetic, just useless. 3. A military hero survived actual wars with bullets flying past his head, only to be assassinated by a slight drizzle and his own stubborn ego. William Henry Harrison stood in the freezing rain for 2 hours, giving his inaugural speech without a coat. He wanted to look tough for the cameras of history. Instead, he caught pneumonia and died 30 days later. He conquered battlefields, but let a gray cloud and some wind put him in the ground. The man manifested toxic masculinity so hard it backfired into a fatal fever. He rejected a warm jacket because he thought shivering showed weakness. He essentially refused to wear a helmet on a speeding motorcycle because it ruins a good haircut. His pride dug his grave before he even unpacked his bags. A fatal flex. 4. The Soviet army went on high alert and prepared for literal doomsday because an old man wanted to practice his amateur stand-up comedy. Ronald Reagan jokingly announced the bombing of Russia during a hot microphone test. He thought he was being hilarious. The Soviets didn't laugh. They fired up their defense grids, assuming nuclear hellfire was minutes away. A world leader turned the apocalypse into a punchline for a radio crew, nearly wiping out millions of lives in the process. He pulled a corporate CEO stunt, jokingly emailing the staff that everyone's fired, but instead of losing a paycheck, humanity loses the planet. The globe held its breath while Reagan chuckled at his own terrible material in a sound booth. What's the worst joke you ever told? The leader of a nation watched his country burst into literal flames, which brings us to 5. James Buchanan claimed his legal contract didn't allow him to hold a fire extinguisher. While the southern states seceded and the Civil War sparked, he sat back and did nothing. He watched the nation tear itself apart from the comfort of his desk, actively deciding to ignore the smoke filling the room. He perfected cowardly corporate procrastination, leaving a flaming dumpster fire for the next shift manager named Lincoln to clean up. He treated the collapse of the nation like an email he didn't want to reply to, clocking out right as the building burned down. He practically handed the keys to the arsonists and went home for a nap. Complete moral failure. He just watched. 6. Zachary Taylor survived hardcore battles with cannons and musket fire, but he couldn't survive a bowl of summer fruit. The war hero stuffed himself with an enormous amount of raw cherries and iced milk while sitting in the blazing sun. Bullets failed to kill him on the battlefield, but some questionable dairy and unwashed fruit caused his gut to explode. His digestive system surrendered to a chaotic patio snack. He walked through literal war zones untouched, only to let a terrible dessert order put him in a casket in broad daylight. You endure the toughest military boot camp on Earth, and then you get violently assassinated by a local smoothie bar menu. His ironclad legacy dissolved in a puddle of curdled milk and cherry pits. What lunch item is your mortal enemy? 7. During the Watergate collapse, the most powerful man on earth wandered the halls screaming at canvases of dead guys. An insomniac Richard Nixon argued with oil paintings of former presidents. He demanded strategic advice from the dried paint forming Thomas Jefferson's face. He paced the carpet at 3 a.m., begging for answers from inanimate wall decor, while his political empire crumbled outside. The guy lost his mind under pressure and starred in his own dark psychological thriller. He turned into a frantic CEO, holding urgent board meetings with the office houseplants, because nobody else would talk to him. He treated museum pieces like an active advisory cabinet, waiting for a brushstroke to solve a federal investigation. A tragic meltdown, just sad art critiques. 8. The leader of the free world found himself helpless, naked, and violently wedged into porcelain. William Howard Taft, weighing 300 pounds, got physically stuck in a standard White House bathtub. His staff had to arrive with literal butter to grease him up and slip him out like a stuck cork. The commander-in-chief couldn't bathe without getting trapped in his own plumbing. He essentially ran into a severe hardware incompatibility issue, forcing a giant USB drive into a tiny, fragile port until the whole system crashed. He laid there trapped in suds, waiting for government employees to lubricate his escape from a basic hygiene routine. The indignity of needing federal assistance just to stand up in a washroom is staggering. A porcelain prison. A founding father fought a literal war for freedom only to throw a temper tantrum, bringing us to 9. John Adams helped write the Constitution, but passed laws jailing journalists who dared to mock his policies. He loudly preached about liberty until somebody hurt his feelings in the morning paper. The moment the press criticized his leadership, he threw them in a dark cell. He mirrored a petty internet forum moderator who preaches about unrestricted free speech, but instantly bans anyone who downvotes his personal posts. He built a nation on the idea of dissenting opinions, then pulled a tyrant move the second he read a bad review of his work. Adams couldn't handle a simple roast, so he twisted the legal system to protect his fragile ego. Hypocrisy at its finest. What a snowflake. 10. Thousands of normal people missed flights and burned expensive fuel simply because the president needed his split ends trimmed for the cameras. Bill Clinton kept Air Force One idling on a runway for an hour just to get a haircut, shutting down the whole of Los Angeles International Airport. He paralyzed a major transportation hub so a stylist could perfect his look. He pulled the ultimate diva influencer move, blocking a major highway so he could secure the perfect lighting for a quick selfie. Commercial jets circled in the sky, wasting money and time, all while the commander-in-chief got a premium blowout on the tarmac. He grounded half the country to ensure his hair bounced correctly on the evening news broadcast. How much did your most expensive haircut cost? 11. Herbert Hoover forced his elderly cabinet members to throw a heavy leather medicine ball over a volleyball net every single morning at 7 a.m. A group of men in their 60s wore white trousers, gasping for air while hurling a lethal leather sack at each other for leisure. They didn't rely on swords, shields, or a premium subscription to a VPN to defend themselves. They just caught a brutal weighted ball to the chest before breakfast. Hoover functioned as a toxic tech CEO, forcing his exhausted, aging developers to do dawn CrossFit sessions to prove company loyalty. He made high-level government officials sweat through mandatory torture masquerading as a fun physical game, threatening their frail spinal columns daily. A brutal morning routine, just agony. A serious intellectual tried to use federal tax dollars to dig a hole and shake hands with subterranean mutants, which brings us to 12. John Quincy Adams genuinely believed the Earth was hollow. The high IQ president wanted to fund an official naval expedition to map the inside of the planet and establish trade routes with the mole people. He wanted diplomatic ties with underground dirt dwellers. He essentially signed an executive order to build a diplomatic embassy in the Minecraft Nether. He planned to send grown men with shovels to negotiate treaties with imaginary crust creatures. The guy had one of the sharpest minds in political history, but still wanted to spend national treasury funds on a journey to the center of the earth. Total delusion. Digging for ghosts. 13. The enemy casually enjoyed the president's wine and perfectly cooked meal while the supposed father of the Constitution sprinted for the hills. James Madison fled the White House in such an intense panic during the War of 1812 that British troops literally sat down and ate his warm dinner. They savored his roasted meats before burning the entire house down to the ground. Madison rage quit a video game so fast he left his character unpaused for the enemy to farm his loot. He abandoned his dining room table in a frantic dash, leaving a gourmet feast as a welcome gift for the invading army. His grand political legacy includes running away while the opposition critiqued his personal chef's seasoning choices, a pathetic retreat. 14. The chief of staff couldn't arrange a meeting with Soviet leaders because the moon sat in the wrong cosmic house. A literal astrologer reading the stars controlled the White House schedule, including high-stakes nuclear summits. Nancy Reagan let the planetary alignment dictate the movements of the most powerful military machine on the planet. I'm not making this up. The administration managed the Cold War based on the advice of a spiritual guru pulling tarot cards at a local coffee shop. They delayed international diplomacy until Jupiter aligned with Mars. Global security depended on horoscope columns and crystal energy instead of geopolitical strategy. They played roulette with the global economy using star charts. Astrology dictated policy. Truly ridiculous. 15. George H.W. Bush fainted and violently vomited directly into the lap of the Japanese Prime Minister during a formal state banquet. A delicate diplomatic event instantly derailed into a gross gastrointestinal explosion caught on global television. He sat down for a prestigious dinner and turned the host into a human splatter canvas. He became such a legendary physical failure at a dinner party that an entire foreign culture created a new slang verb out of his last name. He traveled thousands of miles to strengthen foreign relations, only to project his lunch all over a key ally. The Secret Service couldn't stop a rogue wave of half-digested sushi from ruining a geopolitical summit. The ultimate dinner table disaster. Ever puked in front of your boss? The most powerful man in America cowered in fear from a plastic button, landing us at 16. Benjamin Harrison was so terrified of the newly installed electricity in the White House that he actively refused to touch light switches. He slept with the lights blazing and used his loyal servants as human shields to turn off a basic desk lamp. He commanded the military but hid from invisible wall currents. He mirrored a modern boomer utterly paralyzed by a Wi-Fi router, convinced it constantly leaks invisible brain-melting gas into the living room. The leader of the free world thought a copper wire would instantly execute him if he brushed against a toggle switch. He let the electrical grid hold him hostage in his own bedroom, terrified of progress, a total coward, afraid of sparks. 17. A brilliant criminal mastermind perfectly framed himself because he couldn't stop obsessively bugging his own office. Richard Nixon installed secret recording devices due to intense paranoia, which ended up capturing the exact audio proof needed to destroy his career. He documented his own felonies in high-definition audio. He filmed himself robbing a bank and then accidentally uploaded the raw footage to his own YouTube channel for the world to see. His obsessive need to spy on his enemies caused him to spy on himself, handing prosecutors a neatly wrapped gift of his own guilt. The guy built a high-tech surveillance trap and marched directly into it. He engineered his own demise by pressing the record button. Have you ever accidentally recorded a deep secret? 18. A man ascending to the second highest office in the land publicly trash-talked his coworkers while stumbling at the podium. Andrew Johnson got heavily hammered on straight whiskey to calm his nerves and delivered an incoherent, slurred speech while Abraham Lincoln watched in sheer horror. He turned a sacred political inauguration into a sloppy open mic night at a cheap dive bar. He essentially showed up blasted to his first day at a new corporate job and aggressively roasted the HR department in front of the board of directors. He clung to the speaker's stand, reeking of cheap booze, insulting state senators by name, while his boss sat inches away questioning his life choices. He turned the pinnacle of American democracy into a tragic drunken spectacle. A disgrace. Just embarrassing. 19. Woodrow Wilson ignored a global pandemic so hard that it literally infected his brain and made him accidentally lay the groundwork for World War II. He suppressed news of the Spanish flu, caught it himself, and his fever-induced weakness led to the disastrous signing of the Treaty of Versailles. He let a virus rot his cognitive functions during the most important peace negotiation in modern history. He ghosted a medical emergency until it broke into his house, gave him a blazing fever, and forced him to sign a terrible contract. His physical refusal to acknowledge a plague resulted in him sitting at a table in Europe, too sick to argue against a treaty that doomed the next generation. A cough reshaped the map of the world. Can a fever rewrite the course of history? 20. The president ran out of cash and casually bet museum-grade national artifacts just to stay in a drunken card game. During a loud White House poker night, Warren Harding gambled away a priceless set of historic presidential china and lost the hand. He tossed irreplaceable historical treasures into the pot because he simply couldn't walk away from the table. He morphed into a desperate CEO, pawning the company's vital servers and leather office furniture just to cover his mounting losses on a sketchy sports betting app. He let a terrible bluff cost the nation pieces of its own heritage. He stripped the dining cupboards bare, handing over the literal plates off the government's table to a bunch of smoking buddies. A degenerate gambler wearing a nice suit. Trash behavior. 21. A president almost suffocated to death under the crushing weight of his own muddy, glass-smashing fans. Andrew Jackson invited the general public to the White House, resulting in a drunken mob that smashed everything and forced him to flee out a window. The people rioted, tearing down curtains and breaking furniture to get closer to their hero. He threw an open-invite Facebook house party that turned into a full-scale frat riot, requiring tubs of cheap booze on the lawn as bait to lure them outside. He had to escape his own celebration like a criminal fleeing a crime scene. His supporters wrecked the executive mansion so thoroughly that he spent his first night in office hiding in a nearby hotel. Ever thrown a party that destroyed your house? The illusion of deep political theater shattered instantly because the main actor read the bracketed font by mistake, marking 22. Joe Biden went on autopilot and read the teleprompter's stage directions, muttering, "End of quote, repeat the line out loud." He broke the suspension of disbelief for everyone watching. He proved that modern politics is just watching an overprogrammed NPC glitch out and expose its base code on live television. Instead of delivering a powerful rhetorical strike, he accidentally revealed the script notes hidden in the margins. He recited the director's instructions like a tired news anchor who stopped processing the words on the glass screen. The curtain dropped, revealing a man just reading letters without thinking. A robotic malfunction. Just a glitch. 23. A midlife crisis hit so hard that instead of buying a sports car, a man dragged himself into a jungle suicide mission to fight nature. Following a bitter election loss, Teddy Roosevelt explored a deadly Amazonian river, getting so infected he begged his crew to leave him to die. He threw the ultimate macho temper tantrum. Losing a job promotion made him go wrestle exotic alligators until he caught a brutal tropical disease. He couldn't handle political defeat, so he chose to battle literal malaria and treacherous rapids in South America. He demanded his team abandon his rotting body in the mud because his ego couldn't survive losing a vote back home. The guy almost killed himself out of sheer professional spite. How extreme was your worst midlife crisis? 24. The executive mansion smelled so foul of grease and dairy that people's eyes watered for years after the disaster was devoured. Andrew Jackson kept a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese in the White House until it rotted, then invited 10,000 people to eat the stinking mess. He turned the seat of global power into a rancid dairy farm. He ignored a science experiment in the back of his fridge until it gained sentience, then threw a block party to consume it before it mutated. The floors soaked up the foul stench of moldy cheddar, permanently scarring the nasal passages of future administrations. He let thousands of random citizens tear into a rotting monument of coagulated milk like hungry rats. A biological hazard, disgusting negligence. 25. The sitting president got his carriage impounded and had to do the humiliating walk of shame back to the White House on foot. Ulysses S. Grant was arrested and fined $20 by a terrified police officer for street racing his horse-drawn carriage through Washington. He became the 19th century underground street racer from the Fast and Furious movies, but the driver sported a thick beard and commanded the military. He pushed his horses way past the legal limit, treating the capital's dirt roads like a personal drag strip. The cop felt terrible, but he still booked the leader of the free world for driving like a reckless teenager. Grant paid his fine and walked home in the dirt. A humiliating stroll. A classified military overthrow turned into a brutal slaughter because the boss got cold feet, marking 26. John F. Kennedy canceled vital airstrikes at the last second, leaving a CIA invasion force exposed on a Cuban beach as sitting ducks. He essentially organized a massive surprise party, but turned the lights off and locked the guests outside in the pouring rain to hide his own involvement. He deployed trained men into a chaotic war zone and then deleted their air support right as the enemy bullets started flying. He stranded his own operatives on hostile sand, pretending he had nothing to do with the operation while they got captured. He threw his soldiers under the bus to save face on the international stage. An unforgivable betrayal of trust, just cowardly politics. 27. The commander of the world's greatest military promised black eyes and a broken nose over off-key vocals. Harry Truman sent a violently threatening letter to a newspaper critic who gave his daughter's singing a bad review. He degraded himself into an angry Yelp reviewer, ready to throw hands over a bad rating of a family business. The man who dropped atomic bombs lost his temper because a guy with a typewriter said his kid lacked musical talent. He used official White House stationery to threaten physical assault on a music journalist. He abandoned all presidential decorum to act like an unhinged stage dad, picking a fight in a high school auditorium parking lot. The power of the office used for petty revenge. Ever wanted to punch a harsh internet critic? 28. A solemn, tragic church mourning derailed by a feathered tape recorder, blasting the dead man's greatest hits of vulgarity. Andrew Jackson's pet parrot screamed such horrific profanities at his funeral that attendants had to physically escort the wild bird out. The creature learned every dirty curse word from the president and decided to repeat them during the quiet prayers. He accidentally left his personal search history playing on a loud stereo system over his own casket. The bird squawked naval-grade obscenities while grieving friends tried to pay their respects to the deceased. The animal ruined the somber mood, proving that Jackson swore so much in private that his pets absorbed his toxic vocabulary. A foul-mouthed legacy, hilariously disrespectful. 29. Trying to starve out the enemy but accidentally burning down your own grocery store while your opponent shops next door. Thomas Jefferson banned international trade to punish Europe, which instead collapsed the American economy. He executed the ultimate self-own, shooting himself in the foot to make his rival feel bad about the loud noise. He proved that brilliant writers make terrible accountants. He drafted the Declaration of Independence, then drafted a law that bankrupted the nation's merchants. He locked the ports, destroying domestic businesses, just to spite foreign kings who barely noticed the boycott. He crashed his own car into a brick wall to teach the manufacturer a lesson about safety standards. Ever sabotaged yourself just to be petty? 30. He chewed on raw, fibrous corn armor while dozens of cameras captured his cultural ignorance in stunned silence. Trying to look relatable during a trip to Texas, Gerald Ford bit directly into a tamale without removing the inedible corn husk. He presented the visual of an alien wearing a human skin suit trying to eat a banana with the peel still attached. He smiled for the press while choking down tree bark. He attempted to connect with voters but exposed himself as a disconnected elitist who didn't know how basic regional food functioned. The locals watched the commander-in-chief struggle to swallow a wrapper, instantly realizing he had zero common sense. He swallowed his pride along with a mouthful of indigestible fiber. A culinary disaster. Unbelievably awkward. 31. The man who would eventually reshape global geopolitics spent his 30s crying over unsold luxury hats in a severe recession. Before becoming president, Harry Truman went bankrupt, selling overpriced silk shirts to local farmers, and spent 15 years in crippling debt. He operated as a failed crypto bro, opening an artisanal vape shop in a rural retirement village, tanking his credit score before accidentally becoming emperor. He couldn't successfully manage a small clothing boutique, yet the country later trusted him to manage the economy and the atomic bomb. He failed at retail but somehow failed upwards into the Oval Office. He couldn't sell a tie to a farmer, but he sold himself to the American voters. What's the dumbest business idea you ever had? The government deployed brutal trench warfare tactics against the exact same men who fought for them, bringing us to 32. Herbert Hoover ordered the military to use armored tanks and choking tear gas against starving World War I veterans protesting for their promised bonuses. He ruthlessly gassed his own decorated war heroes right in the streets of the capital. He reached the peak of catastrophic public relations, acting as a brutal company, firing its loyal employee of the month by deliberately running them over with a heavy delivery truck. He ordered active duty soldiers to violently assault the men who built the nation's military reputation. Hoover destroyed his political career by burning the makeshift camps of desperate patriots. A sickening betrayal. Just evil. I need to stop for a second. Seriously, I'm looking at this script and my brain is starting to melt. We've covered men who gambled away priceless artifacts, men who got stuck in porcelain bathtubs, and guys who threw up on international prime ministers. The sheer volume of relentless stupidity here is overwhelming the recording session. But we've got to crown a winner. We need a champion of failure. I give the title of King of Unforced Errors to William Henry Harrison. The man literally talked himself into an early grave just to prove he wasn't shivering in the rain. He died to protect a fragile macho image. We've seen inflated egos, bizarre illnesses, and swearing animals, but what's the ultimate symbol of physical failure? What action defines the fragility of power today? 33. Gerald Ford tumbled down the rain-slicked stairs of Air Force One, immortalizing himself as a national punchline. Policies fade, but physical embarrassment is eternal. History won't remember the treaties you sign, it remembers how you fell down the stairs on camera. Power's a fragile illusion, broken the moment gravity humbles you on television. We missed countless idiots. Go to the comments and declare the ultimate presidential fool we forgot. The most ruthless historical roast gets pinned next. Subscribe if you love watching the powerful faceplant.